Welcome, everyone. Have you ever wondered how incredibly smart, totally rational people end up getting completely tricked into joining extreme groups? Well, today we've got a truly fascinating explainer lined up for you that dives right into that exact question. Our goal here is to master 21 absolutely crucial English phrases, especially if you're an intermediate learner aiming for that B1 or B2 level. But, we aren't just going to memorize a boring list. Science shows that learning vocabulary through a narrative dramatically improves your memory retention, so we're going to walk through a story. Let's imagine a fictional person. We'll call him Alex. We're going to learn our target vocabulary by following Alex's gripping psychological journey of exactly why people join and ultimately leave extreme self-help groups. Let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be walking through 6 distinct phases. First, the business model. Second, the initial enthusiasm. Third, emotionally intense communities. Fourth, when the spell breaks. Fifth, the inevitable backlash. And finally, warning signs to look out for. All right, let's jump in.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the business model. To really understand the life cycle of these controversial groups, we've got to start at the foundation and see how they operate from a purely structural standpoint. So our first 2 terms are totally foundational. These extreme communities, they don't just exist for the fun of it. They rely on a specific business model. Now, a business model is simply the plan a company has for making a profit, right? Like a bakery's business model is baking and selling bread. But in this context, the product is, well, hope. The business model here is almost entirely centered around selling high-priced self-development programs. Imagine our fictional friend Alex paying $10,000 for a single weekend retreat. That is a high-priced program. These are incredibly expensive courses or coaching sessions that promise to just completely transform a person's life or career or relationships, and honestly, the high price tag is actually part of the psychological hook. If it costs a lot of money, human psychology naturally assumes, wow, it must be incredibly valuable.
Moving right along to Section 2, the initial enthusiasm. Now that we understand the financial structure, let's transition to the lure phase. How are people like Alex magnetically drawn into these high-priced programs in the first place?
It usually happens in 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is meeting the charismatic leader. Charisma basically means having massive personal charm and magnetism. And hey, a charismatic leader isn't always a bad thing. A really good teacher or an inspiring boss can be highly charismatic too. But here, that charm is used as a weapon to draw people in effortlessly. Then comes Step 2. The prospective member hears glowing success stories. Alec listens to these wild testimonials from people claiming the group literally saved their lives or tripled their income. And that leads directly to Step 3. Alex begins to feel an overwhelming wave of initial enthusiasm. You know that feeling, right? Is that powerful, exciting rush you get when starting something brand new that promises to fix all your problems?
During this whole honeymoon phase, 2 very descriptive English phrases come into play. First, new members feel uplifted. To be uplifted means to be emotionally elevated. You feel happier, more hopeful, and just full of joy. And because everyone in the group is cheering them on, members start telling themselves, I have finally found a place where I belong. As an everyday example, you might say, after moving to a new city, I finally found a place where I belong. It speaks to that deep, deep human desire for community and acceptance. The group is offering Alex a brand new, shiny identity.
But, of course, the honeymoon eventually fades. That brings us to Section 3, emotionally intense communities. Let's shift our focus to see what happens as Alex gets deeper into this ecosystem and the tension really begins to rise.
What started as this super welcoming space slowly reveals itself as one of these emotionally intense communities. In these groups, emotions are quite literally always dialed up to an 11. You're either crying with absolute joy, or you are being aggressively pushed by the leader to confront your deepest, darkest fears. There's really no in between. And this constant emotional roller coaster is completely by design. It's meant to foster emotional dependence. Here is a totally fascinating psychological fact. Emotional dependence can be incredibly similar to a physiological addiction. Your brain chemistry actually changes. The group breaks Alex down so thoroughly that Alex feels an absolute desperate need for the community to build him back up. They become totally reliant on the leader for their basic emotional stability. So the crucial point and phrase to learn here is the phrasal verb to keep up with. In everyday life, you probably try to keep up with your favorite TV shows or keep up with your friends' lives on social media. It basically means maintaining the same pace. But in an extreme group, members face this absolutely exhausting struggle to keep up with the demands. Alex has to keep up with the financial costs, constantly paying for the next massive level of classes.
Alex has to keep up with the time commitments, attending endless late-night seminars. And on top of all that, they have to keep up with the emotional energy required to always look perfectly happy and devoted. It becomes completely and utterly draining.
Which brings us to a critical turning point in our story. Section 4, When the Spell Breaks. Because let's be real, no one can sprint on a treadmill forever. Eventually, exhaustion sets in, and the illusion shatters.
And this brilliantly illustrates a fantastic idiom, when the spell breaks. Literally, it refers to magic. Imagine a wizard casting a spell on someone and suddenly, poof, the magic wears off. Figuratively, in everyday English, you might say, I used to love that band, but when the spell broke, I realized they weren't actually very good. In a psychological context, it describes the exact second someone snaps out of a deep illusion. Alex suddenly wakes up and sees the extreme community, the manipulative leader, and their totally empty bank account for what they truly are. The magic is just gone.
Once that spell breaks, we see a dramatic shift. A member goes from pure devotion, meaning intense love, loyalty, and a willingness to do absolutely anything for the leader, straight to deep resentment. Resentment is this bitter, burning anger at having been treated unfairly. This extreme flip is what psychologists call an emotional reversal. You very rarely see someone slowly fade away from an extreme group. Instead, their emotions flip like a light switch, straight from one absolute extreme to the other.
A beautifully vivid idiom to describe this emotional reversal is a pendulum swings back. Picture an old grandfather clock with that heavy metal pendulum swinging back and forth. If you pull that heavy weight extremely far to the right, representing that fake, exhausting happiness and blind devotion, well, physics and human psychology dictates that when you let it go, it must swing back. And usually, it swings back hard, with equal force to the extreme left. That extreme artificial love inevitably swings back as extreme uncontrollable anger.
And that swinging pendulum launches us directly into Section 5, the inevitable backlash. Let's look at the vocabulary of the fallout that emerges when former members start reacting against the group. The emotional crash for Alex follows a very specific timeline. Phase 1 is dissatisfaction. Alex realizes they aren't getting those life-changing results they were promised. Then comes Phase 2, which is deeply internal, self-blame. Alex feels foolish and angry at themselves for spending so much money and believing all the lies. But eventually, that internal pain turns outward into Phase 3, backlash. Now, backlash is a strong, highly visible negative reaction. It is almost always public and collective. For example, when a famous company changes the recipe of a super popular drink and thousands of customers protest online, that's a backlash. During this period of backlash, former devotees reverse their attitude. This action phrase means they completely flip their perspective and behavior. Think of it like giving a restaurant a glowing 5-star review on Monday and then organizing an angry protest outside that exact same restaurant on Tuesday. They completely reverse their attitude. The exact same person who was trying to recruit their family members yesterday will actively warn people to stay as far away from the group as possible today. The ultimate consequence of this vicious cycle is former members going highly public and calling the entire business a scam. Now, a scam is a dishonest, fraudulent scheme designed to steal money. Calling it a scam is the ultimate weapon, really, because it directly attacks the business model we discussed way back in Section 1. By labeling those high-price programs a total scam, the angry former members are actively trying to destroy the financial foundation that originally lured them in. It brings the whole story full circle into a complete and total destruction of the community's public image.
Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds up. Section 6, Warning Signs. We've traced the entire vocabulary life cycle, from the initial lore all the way to the furious exit. Now let's extract some practical takeaways.
So, if you want to avoid getting caught up in manipulative organizations, whether it's a toxic workplace, a questionable self-help seminar, or just a shady online course, you need to look out for warning signs. These are red flags, clear indicators that something just isn't right. Is the leader too perfect? Is the pressure to spend money way too high? Furthermore, you absolutely must practice expectation management. This is such an incredibly useful phrase for daily life. When you start a new job or sign up for a new gym, expectation management means keeping your hopes realistic so you aren't completely disappointed. If a self-help program promises to magically solve literally all your life's problems in one expensive weekend, healthy expectation management will tell you, well, it's simply too good to be true.
We have covered a lot of ground today, and we've learned some incredibly powerful English vocabulary by exploring Alex's dark but totally fascinating psychological cycle.
We went from that initial enthusiasm right into the dangerous emotional dependence, experienced the dramatic moment the spell breaks, and finally watched the pendulum swing back into a furious backlash. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Equipped with these new concepts and vocabulary words, how will you spot these warning signs in your own life? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.